Hi again, my name's Scott, and I'm recording a new video for you to consider. And in this video, we want to actually go back to where it all began to understand how the world became as it is. As we talked about in our previous video, how to live with God in an imperfect and broken world. I want to actually sort of go back and have a look at, well, how did that brokenness begin? And of course, it all starts with Adam and Eve, a tree, some fruit, and a serpent. And so Genesis 3, verse 5, sort of lays out for us the picture of what happened. And when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise. And by the way, that's a hearkening forward to what James talks about, the lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. That's what's happening here. She took of the fruit, and she ate it. And she also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he also ate. So here's a way to think about this. It's a little bit different. And I'm going to paraphrase a little of John Eldridge's Wild at Heart. I've already sort of talked about him in a previous video. I won't go back into that. But what could have happened is a few days before the fall, God could have pulled Adam aside for a conversation. And in that conversation, God could have played the part of, I suppose, a controlling parent. I mean, he could have said, now, Adam, Thursday afternoon, about 3 o'clock, you're going to be walking with Eve and you're going to be confronted with a choice that's going to be offered to you by a serpent. And if God was a hyper controlling parent, that's probably how it would have happened. Have a read of John's Wild at Heart, and you'll sort of see, in a little more detail there. But that's probably how it would have happened, okay? But it seems to me, and I think John thinks this too, is that God was giving Adam the chance to be an adult. Kind of like, Adam, you got this. You'll pull through. I trust you. Okay? And that's how it actually should happen. Sooner or later, on the path to adulthood, we've got to learn to make appropriate choices. And even sometimes monumental choices, right? And of course, God knows the beginning from the end. He knows the outcome. But he doesn't meddle, right? And Adam actually needed to learn and to grow, and to do that, his character needed to be tested. It's not something that just happens. You sometimes you got to go through some tests, and that's the key, I think, to what happened in Eden. And so on a Thursday afternoon, then about 3 o'clock, they're walking in the garden, Adam and Eve, and they're faced with a choice. And Paul in 1 Timothy 2, verse 14, actually makes it really plain. Eve did make a mistake. She was deceived. But Adam was not. And I think that's actually a really important marriage lesson, in fact. From time to time, one of us in our marriage relationship is going to make a mistake. And it's up to the other party in the marriage to, pull us out of the ditch when we make that mistake, all right? And if it was Adam that had made the mistake, then it was going to be up to Eve to step up. But in this case, Eve made the mistake. And Adam's choices here were many. All right, he could have countered the serpent's arguments. He could have tried to convince Eve to not take the fruit. He could have grabbed the fruit out of her hand, right, and thrown it away, or pulled it off the tree before she got to it, thrown it away. There's no prohibition on him touching it, despite what Eve said. Eve actually misquoted what God said. There was nothing about touching it, right? I mean, he could have grabbed Eve and physically pulled her away from the danger. I mean, she was in danger of death. It's pretty important, this. And I suppose, death was not unknown in the garden, right? He could have actually killed the serpent. Instead, he did nothing. And I guess that's possibly not unexpected, all right? Sometimes we're confronted with difficult decisions involving someone that we love. And when that happens, we can become paralyzed. It's what happened to Adam. He did nothing. He's caught between losing his wife or damaging his relationship with God through disobedience. And instead, he just ends up a passenger in this dreadful, dreadful mistake. And the thing is that, as Paul says in 1 Timothy, you know, he wasn't deceived here. So in fact, what happened is, in an instant, it appears that he weighed up the options and chose disobedience. He accepted the fruit. He chose, in effect, Eve over God. And in so doing, he's actually questioning the righteousness of God. Let's unpick that a little bit. So Eve's disobeyed God, okay? Genesis 2 verse 17 makes it really clear. It says, in that moment that she disobeyed God, dying, she would die. You can't get away from that. That was what was going to happen. She was going to become mortal, and she was in train, in fact, toward the punishment that was finally pronounced in Genesis 3:19. Adam could have saved her from this, and he didn't. But then he compounds that error by joining her in her doom, right? There's a really important subtext to this, okay? He did not trust God. He didn't trust that God is righteous and a just judge, but he's also merciful. I mean, Eve called God a liar. We can't escape from that. Eve called God a liar because she chose to believe the serpent over God. But Adam called God's righteousness into question. See, Eve made a poor decision, but Adam didn't trust God to rescue her from that decision. Now let's flip this around. Let's look at how God looks at this. I mean, these are his children. He adores them. He's provided everything they could possibly need. And here they are, standing up, looking at him and saying he's a liar and he's unjust. That's pretty extreme. That's a pretty extreme provocation. Go forward a little while to Exodus chapter 34, and we can actually understand the character of God. And the character of God fundamentally is mercy, grace, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin. Sure, there's the other justice parts that sort of follow that, but 80% of that verse that talks about the character of God is all about mercy and love and graciousness and forgiveness and faithfulness, truthfulness, right? They've called into question those very key components of God's character. And that requires correction, right? It can't be ignored. So God leaps into action. He pronounces judgment, and it can't be any other way. But immediately with that, judgment, and integral to that judgment, God gives them a way back. And that's the beauty of our God. From a human perspective, we're not actually really very good at balancing justice with mercy. Either we provide consequences and no way back, allow our anger to sort of overflow, and we sort of pronounce judgment in some form or whatever, but no way back. Or we provide mercy with no consequences for the action that led to it, but not God. Humans, when debating the existence of God, often point to the consequences of the fall, everything from child death to whatever else, major natural disasters and massacres and awful things that people do to each other. It's a broken world. It's broken because Adam and Eve fell and took with them creation. And unfortunately, humans, when they're debating the existence of God, then say, well, because these calamities happen, there must be no God. And as a result, they fail to see our culpability for these things. That God has provided us with a merciful way out in Jesus. And that we tend to ignore in all of this our obligation to seek to fix this broken world. And that leads us to the question: if you were in God's position in Eden, if you've got two creatures that you've fed, nurtured, and looked after, and they treat you with this level of disrespect, calling you a liar and a cheat, would you have been merciful? Would you have allowed this wrong to stand? Would you perhaps have destroyed them and started again? And we'd probably get it wrong, let's face it. Instead, our God, who is love, who embodies justice, steers an appropriate middle course. There's consequences. Can't get away from it. There's consequences to match the offence and a promise that underpins recovery. The method of recovery is appropriate to reverse the offence. Jesus was going to come and he's going to show us the way. He'd never question his Father's love and mercy, and he would proclaim the truth of God for all to see. He took on the form of a man. He relinquished his divinity to demonstrate the salvation of God in a man. As John recites in his first epistle, when we see Jesus, we beheld the light of God with no shadow. You know, that which was from the beginning. He talks about it in first epistle of John chapter 1. And Adam and Eve were faced with a test, a crossroads on the path from innocence to maturity. And they took a wrong turn. So God the Son became incarnate to rescue us and to bring us back to him. So what do we learn from this? As Adam and Eve were, we too are on a path from spiritual childhood to spiritual maturity, maturity as adults in the service of God. And Scripture demonstrates in many occasions that God wants to encourage us on that journey, to have us to become adult sons and daughters of the Most High. We'll be held to account for our decisions, appropriate to the level of maturity that we've attained. Jesus actually has provided us with an example of how to do it, understanding, of course, that he was perfect and we are not, so we're not going to do it as well as he did, but we certainly have an example there of how to do it. To the best of our abilities, God expects us to emulate his Son, to live pure, to live undefiled in a world that hates God and, by extension, horribly hates us. I'll go one better. He expects us to set about healing this broken world, broken in the fall and compounded over the millennia since. The task for those of us who are striving to become adult children of the Father is for us to first trust him, to lean on him and to believe in him. And second, to take action at those crucial times where we are faced with the choice between wrong and right. We're called to live a life that is active in the service of God, showing the light of the indwelling God in our hearts. Thanks for your time. Please come and visit our website at heartforkingdom.com. And can I encourage you to like, share, and subscribe to this channel? Help us to grow. I'd love to spread this message to more people. May God bless you in the week that comes, and talk soon.